We'll translate if there's a question in Polish. So we were going to let me maybe just sit here and help moderate. We have about 15 minutes until we are going downstairs for lunch, so it's an opportunity for you to reflect and to hear from Jonathan. Are you happy to take questions, or did you want to make any other commentary before we do?
No, I think that was the commentary, so it's fun.
Okay, if I can maybe just start with one question that I have, Jonathan, or an observation. The theme of our conference is Generations Remember, and I think that your film completely fits into this with memory as our homeland, and the memory is the only thing that perseveres, and in fact, your film made me think about how fleeting memory is and how, well, personal it always is at the same time. I guess the question that I have is, what we're doing here is, in a sense, we are recreating memories from our own families that they were unable to really give to us, much in the same way as maybe we were unable to absorb them. But I was just wondering if you could maybe make some reflections on this element of memory across the generations, and what that actually means for you. I think also from it could be intellectual, but also maybe from a more spiritual point of view. As we watch your history, we can't help but be moved emotionally. Those of us who have lived through it, or who have lived through the effects of those losses. And my question really was about how you felt over your journey.
Well, it's been a very long journey to do this. It's interesting because, I started with interviewing interviewing. Like I said at the beginning of the film, my first memory really of my babcia was of her talking about Africa. That's not just a poetic license. That's really what I remember, is being a kid and her talking about it. And, so we absorb these stories. That's how we become human beings, really. Tomasz was saying before, I lost the quote, but he was saying, culture is what basically carries us through when all the other fragments of a country are lost. But when you grow up in a country like Canada or wherever, and your families are coming from these histories of displacement, then you're really grasping onto their stories as your connection to your own history. I think one of the things I've been thinking of in getting to the end of this project, after a long time working on it, is how, my babcia and chacha and my family in general were people who told their stories. And I know that there are those families and those individuals where people don't like to talk about it. And I think whether they do talk about it or they don't, we as the children or grandchildren, those things are inside us. We're haunted by those things. So to have my babcia, my chacha, and my family tell these stories actually gave names to the things that I might see in the dark, so to speak, because you feel it, and you inherit it, maybe even genetically. There's research on that. But the title for the film came maybe 2 or 3 years after I went to England with my babcia and met my chacha, and they had that hilarious and also kind of poignant argument about their history. And I was on a ride I was getting a ride to Toronto, and there were a group of us in the car, 3 or 4 of us who didn't really know each other. I had a really good conversation with a woman who was a poet in the back of the car on the way to Toronto. And 20 minutes before we got out of the car, somehow we talked about, we stumbled on our family history. And it turns out that her family was from, 30 kilometers away in Poland, Belarus now, from where my family was from. So we'd had this really incredible connection and spoke for 5 hours, and only realized at the very end that actually we're from the same place. And she was the one who actually kind of gave the title to the film. She's like, well, she basically said, we're from the same place because we remember it, and that's why I gave the title to the film. I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but kind of a long-winded journey, kind of like the film, but.
Well, I think one of the things that we've been doing Crest of Siberia for, 17 or 18 years now, and we all have our own journeys and the reasons why we've gotten involved in it. And maybe what I wanted to do with your journey as the backdrop is invite anyone here from the first generation or the second or the third generation. We have at least 3 generations here. If they wanted to reflect on their family stories and how they're relating to it, and if this film, how did it resonate for you? We do have time. If you'd like to just maybe raise your hand, I can come to you with the microphone or just stand up. Barbara, maybe come up to the stage because we are going to be recorded. So if you're here, people can participate through the internet as well. I think we can see you if you're here. Yes.
Nie. Ja już jestem za stara, żeby się gramolić po górach. Ja to jestem z pierwszego pokolenia.
I am a first generationer. I grew up in England, so I'm sorry if I have problems with the language. My mother, after Kazakhstan, ended up in the school of young cadets in Palestine, but I am incredibly envious of those who managed to dig into their family history. I have been in Kresy, I've been to Lwów and Stanisławów and Łódzk. I spent entire days in the archives digging for the documents, and I know that it is very difficult. And even here in the Central Military Archives, it's very difficult to find all this information, but every bit of information for me is a triumph. I remember very briefly, I remember when I joined the Kresy Siberia group a year and a half ago. Within 2 or 3 hours, Marcos Strzowski sent me a message. He says, "I found your mom." And I said, "What in the world? How could he find my mom?" He immediately accessed the Hoover archives in Stanford and found 7 pages written by my mother at age 15. It was Sunday night. My other half was sitting upstairs. I screamed. He ran downstairs because he thought something had happened. And I said, "My mom, I got my mom." And my mom passed away in 1988 when she was 67, and I'm already older than she is. So now I'm looking for my grandfather, 2 meters tall. He lived in Lwów, was an owner of a factory, and my greatest dream is to find at least one photograph of this man who was imprisoned by the NKVD for a year in Lwów and then was deported to Kazakhstan. He did not survive. My mother's younger sister did not survive. Only my grandmother and my mom ended up in Britain, and I'm incredibly envious. And even though my family was not in Africa, I would like to watch this film several times because I feel that this is a film about me and my family. So that's all. Maybe somebody else can share.
Nina, would you like? You come up on stage, so we can see you.
Dzień dobry. My name is Nina. I'm second generation from New Zealand. Thank you for the film. It was really, really moving. So my father lived with a terror of police. So seeing those soldiers was pretty hard, and it was something he didn't speak about, but we lived with that fear. And my mother had a very serious mental illness, which meant that the police came to our house. And I remember when I was 14 watching his hand shake, and it was the memory of the police coming when he was a young man. But I saw that lived out some 30 years later. I just think that, you know, he'd carried that burden all his life, and your comment, I think which one of you said about trauma, and trauma can be inherited, and there's some good evidence now. I'm a GP, I'm a doctor, that trauma changes the telomeres in your genes, and so even though you haven't experienced that trauma yourself, even you haven't experienced that trauma yourself, it does change you, and understanding ourselves better helps us cope. Thank you very much for the film.
Thank you for watching. I appreciate. I hope it wasn't too long. You guys started clapping like before the end. It was like, it's like wait. This is a good test screening because I might have to make a change. And just there are a few things to change. I know some of the translation might be off. Like it's not final. But yeah, I mean, just to follow maybe very quickly, like you know, growing up in Canada, like I knew we were Polish, and we went to Polish, you know, Mass and church and Christmas and everything, but we were like a subset within like the Polish history. Obviously what happened on the Western side ended up dominating the narrative of what happened during the war. So it was really confusing to understand where we're from, and it's just over time. I mean, even meeting, you know, the Chrissy Siberia guys, like I remember coming to Poland, Warsaw 2010, 11 the first time.
Trudno było zrozumieć, skąd jesteśmy, kiedy dorastaliśmy i zachodnia narracja historii dominowała. Kiedy odkryłem ten film z obozu w Węgru, to było...
You know, one of the new members, Jessica Castro, who'd reached out to me a couple months ago, she's like, my family was in Uganda, my babcia died when I was 7 or 6 years old, I only got fragments of her story, I came across your film, I didn't know there were other people. And so we started a conversation, and you know, I sent her to all the resources, including Chrissy Siberia, that I didn't know about when I was, you know, younger. So that's kind of what this is all about, is sharing these stories and experiences, I think, because you can't move past that kind of trauma on your own, especially when you don't understand the context of it. You know, so that's what this really, that's why this is very meaningful for me to be here with you everyone here screening this, you know.
And Jonathan, I think it's things that you're doing that are so valuable to help people, not just to understand the stories, but to understand themselves a little bit and perhaps heal in some ways, because one of the things, sadly, post-traumatic stress syndrome wasn't really understood 50 years ago. And as we're learning more, we're also learning that if you keep it inside yourself, it doesn't go away and it doesn't get better. In fact, you pass it on, and I think, Amanda, maybe you'll be able to tell us some things about this tomorrow, which is the way that people successfully deal with trauma seems to be by talking about it with others and sharing it. And actually, that's one of the surprising effects of having formed the group, which spontaneously formed almost 20 years ago as people were trying to understand. And one of the real benefits has been that sharing and saying, I'm not alone, this has happened to other people, exactly as you were recounting a moment ago. Now, I'm just noticing that it's 1 minute till we're supposed to go down for lunch, and I know that Maciej is a very strict taskmaster on us. Jonathan, will you be here through lunch as well and later on? So if people want to continue the conversation, please do. And for me, one of the values of these conferences is not just hearing people speak, but having the conversations and the meetings. So please feel free to do this.
Just say one more thing. Nobody in my family knew that I found that footage, by the way, that my babcia was in it. Like, that's been a secret. And I've asked my mom to swear to secrecy that nobody finds out about that, because that footage sat unseen for a very, very long time. And when I saw that, my jaw dropped off my face. So it's... So
we're all sworn to secrecy here.
You're all sworn to
yes?
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you again. Thank you very much. Maciej.
Ja chciałem tylko przypomnieć Państwu, że
Just like to remind you that the conference is streamed online. So Stefan has linked the broadcast and on the Facebook page. So if you have any friends or family that you want to watch the live streaming, they will be able to watch and listen. And now, on your way to the restroom, there are stairs going down on the left-hand side. Lunch there, and there is also a platform if you have a hard time with the stairs. And downstairs there are also 2 restrooms. And we are meeting again at 3:30 for the second part of our conference. So enjoy the break and see you later.